Here we go again, with Christmas on the horizon, a holiday that should be a time for families to put the past behind them and look towards the future. A new variant of the virus has seemingly been dispatched from poor old Africa as the gift no one asked for and no one wants. After months of messages of fear from our governments and their favoured scientists, here comes more of the same. We can only presume that too many of us were seen to be awakening from the toxic trance into which we had been put by propaganda from the nudge unit. Fear has been the key to nearly 2 years of unprecedented power for politicians and their scientists. Fear has also blinded people to the reality of manipulation and mass hypnosis used to make them and to keep them compliant. But with that fear on the wane, losing its power to do harm, much like the virus was losing its power, it was plainly time to cast another spell. And here it is, in the form of yet another variant. How timely. Someone even managed to sprinkle for a while the acronym HIV over this latest mutation, like bitter icing on a stale cake. While our government, like so many governments around the world, seeks to eat yet more months, perhaps more years, out of the worn-out pandemic by replaying their greatest hits of last year, something else is becoming obvious, and it's that the virus seemingly had the power to stop people, including clever people, from thinking for themselves. COVID overcame logic, reason, and common sense. COVID even made some scientists unlearn science. Throw another variant into the mix, as they have done, and now more and more people, folk wanting only the peace to go about the business of their lives, would be forgiven for wondering which way is up. Because, with science unlearned, or at least set aside, it's apparent to anyone with their eyes open that those scientists and doctors have got themselves into a proper tangle now. I hardly know where to begin to list all of the apparent confusion. In no particular order, I've heard it said today that the new variant might sidestep the vaccines and that it's therefore vital for everyone to get their booster shot. How does that work? The vaccines might not stop this variant, so take more vaccine. Some scientists and doctors are saying now that maybe they vaccinated too many people too quickly in some parts of the world, while not vaccinating enough people in other places, like the African continent. Apparently, and I think I have this right, this has forced the virus to act like any species under pressure, in that those mutations best able to cope with the new, tougher conditions, by being more transmissible perhaps, are coming to the fore, survival of the fittest and all that. I'm sure it was at least rumoured at first that the new variant, the Botswana variant or Omicron, wasn't he a transformer, or whatever they're calling it now, had sprung from unvaccinated people. Now I read that no, all 4 confirmed cases were fully vaccinated, so that it becomes clear that mutations, more dangerous or not, are just as likely to come from the fully jabbed. And don't get me started on natural immunity, which is what you have if you've had COVID and got over it with only your immune system for company. Because while one scientist says it's the best option, others say it counts for naught, and that the only way is to roll up your sleeve for the 3rd time, or the 4th, or the 5th. Let me put it this way. For a while there, those scientists given the spotlight and the microphone had a good go at driving a single narrative. It almost made sense for a while, in a twisted, not quite right, something funny going on there sort of way. Not anymore though. Now the cracks are starting to show, the wheels coming off the state-sponsored wagon. I've said all along that this would prove, when all was said and done, to be a tragic lesson in the hubris of some humans, the sort that wear white coats or that like to give press conferences, which is to say, overconfidence from those that said they had all the answers and that everyone else should just shut up and do what they're told. As the months go by, hubris seems more and more like the explanation for so much that has gone awry. But enough about the virus, whatever it is. wherever it came from and whatever it's doing right now while I speak. Tragically, this process of unlearning science, forgetting, replacing true with false, did not begin with COVID-19. Strange to say, COVID is just a symptom of something much more dangerous, and that's the deliberate dismantling of so much that our ancestors learned and built and handed on to us in trust. It enabled an acceleration of something we really should have been aware of for years, the taking apart of so much of the world of science and reason and enlightenment by those who might have been expected and trusted to be its inheritors. Over the last few months, in their efforts to craft a narrative with the power to dupe the unwary, governments, scientists, academics and others have at best lost their way, and at worst they have knowingly vacated, walked away from the vast cathedral that has been the home of history, science, culture, beauty, indeed all that is good and worth preserving. In their hell for leather scramble to grab and then secure powers previously undreamed of, our leaders and their advisers have turned their backs on decades, centuries in fact, of wisdom carefully acquired by the ancestors, some of those that went before them in the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, laid the foundations for the civilization with which we have been blessed. Those that came after built upon the foundations, carefully and painstakingly furthering our understanding of the world and of our own species. They learned many things, the ancestors, by observation, by careful development and application of the scientific method. They learned about medicine and about biology. They learned, just as a for instance, and long, long ago, that the human species is split into two sexes, male and female, and that while outward appearances might be altered, sex cannot be changed, not with scalpels and not with drugs. Some scientists and doctors have unlearned that as well. They learned, the ancestors, that chattel slavery was a grotesque stain on humankind and did away with it. They saw to it that power rested not with kings or emperors or preening elites, but with the people. They made provision for the education of all. They understood that tolerance and inclusion were better than any other options and made laws so that men and women were to be treated equally. They learned to be tolerant of other faiths. They learned that people should be judged by the content of their characters and not by the colour of their skins. More and more people are being told now that in being white they are guilty of original sin, a sin for which there is neither forgiveness nor redemption. Those that came before us learned, late in the day right enough, but they also learned to be tolerant of different sexualities. All of this learning and wisdom was raised up like a cathedral or the grandest Colosseum. But cathedrals and Colosseums depend upon solid foundations. When the power of Rome waned, their great structures fell into disuse. The barbarians, for the most part, hardly knew what to make of them, those towering edifices, and so ignored them as they fell into decline. Amphitheatres, great bridges, viaducts, aqueducts, entire cities. It's up to those of us who care to conserve and to maintain the wonders raised by our ancestors to reoccupy the space made of reason and enlightenment and left vacant by those who have, on account of wishing to push a new ideology that mocks and seeks to undo the past, wandered away into the wilderness of the social justice warriors, of the so-called woke. They've turned their backs on so much that was learned after great effort and often at great cost. That grand and lofty space, that cathedral of our culture and our civilization, is still there, at least for now, but it requires constant maintenance and love. Those of us who care should go about the business of looking after the old place. Only then might we continue to benefit from the shelter it has long provided from the cold, confusing world outside. The Omicron variant, what are we to make, Tom, of this pre-Christmas gift?
It's just so utterly depressing, isn't it, to see that announcement go out earlier that Boris was going to give another press conference, just all of the kind of foreboding that strikes in you. And there just seeming to be no recognition of how we're in an utterly different situation to what we were in March 2020. You know, we have the mass of the population vaccinated. We have, in this case, a new strain in which no one's even sure how serious this is. They think it spreads more quickly. They believe it could evade the vaccines, which doesn't mean that we're back to square one. It just means they're slightly less effective at you getting infected. And yet, not only is the response again more restrictions to continue to keep the kind of sword of Damocles swinging over us, not ruling anything out and all the rest of it, but that also, again, the response from the media, with some noble exceptions, is, again, why aren't you going further and faster and more towards lockdown and authoritarianism? I just feel like we're stuck in limbo again. And it's just so depressing, considering the fact that I, like many people, felt that we were at least at the kind of, the beginning of the end at this point, but it seems not.
Emma, was it to be expected? Am I just a cynic? Because I feel as if, we were talking about it with various people, it's nearly Christmas, what they're going to do to ruin Christmas. Lo and behold, Omicron.
Well, I think, you mentioned the sword of Damocles. I think that's sort of really hits the nail on the head, is the psychological effect of this, because we saw what was happening in Austria and in other countries where they were locking down the unvaccinated, and even cynics like me were saying, well, it does seem as if here this is the beginning of the end, and actually suddenly there seemed to, at least relatively speaking, to other European countries be a little bit more common sense in the UK. And that was partly because we were saying, as is still the case now, despite this variant, that hospitalisations are down, deaths are down, regardless of how many cases there are, that I think people started to get a little bit of hope that actually things were going back to normal, and that maybe this would be the Christmas as we expected last Christmas, for everything to be over by. And I think, as you mentioned as well, on the psychological effect of this, you mentioned that the sort of cognitive dissonance between saying, on the one hand, this might escape the vaccine, but on the other hand, this is a reason for why you must have your boosters, and to keep going with that. And I think many people will be thinking, is this the beginning of a move towards an announcement about vaccine passports similar to what we've been seeing in Austria and other countries?
Tom, you mentioned a lot of the media and how, straight out the blocks they were galloping towards deadliest yet, HIV, all the rest of it. Why do you think, after surely having seen the detrimental effect it was having on people, whether you want to sell papers or not, why this instinct to go straight for it can only be bad news?
Well, the age-old thing about the media, insofar as if it bleeds, it leads, and negativity sells and all the rest of it, is important here, I think. But at the same time, I think it also clashes together just without getting too grand about it. No one in kind of public life, in those kind of higher intellectual circles, whether it's the media or academia, put any importance on freedom anymore. You saw this in the run-up even to the last lockdown, which again, or the first lockdown, I should say, which is a very different situation to what we're in now. There was no consideration as to whether basically trying to push the government down a kind of CCP-style line, just a much softer version of it, would be appropriate in a country such as ours. There was no consideration of it. There was a kind of sense in which, the first person to demand that martial law should be declared next Tuesday is the morally virtuous person. And of course, when you're in the middle of a crisis, there's always going to be an argument about at what point is the threat such that therefore normal rules have to be suspended. But what it feels like, especially today, is that we're just now in a situation in which those freedoms are now entirely contingent. Like, the line has been crossed now. We're not in a kind of, this is just a special situation and we need to work out what's going on and we need to act, so therefore, under very tight conditions, we're going to curb those freedoms that we value so much. That's just completely gone now. The precautionary principle rules, and therefore freedoms can just be given back and taken away at a moment's instance. I know there'll be a lot of people who will say these measures are relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but it's just that sense of the inability of the government to ever draw a line under this, despite the fact that, north of 90% of people have antibodies and all the rest of it, tells us that a line has been crossed, I think.
What do you think about freedom, Emma? Over the last couple of years, more or less, I've begun to wonder that the willingness to accept all that's happened, I've begun to wonder if it isn't down to freedom being onerous and personal responsibility being a burden to carry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And have the government latched on to the fact that a lot of people actually quietly quite like just being told what to do?
I think it's almost a part of human nature to have this almost immature desire to lean on a crutch. And I think in many ways we're living in a very immature society, that many of the younger generation are quite immature and do enjoy being nannied by the state. And I think, you're right that when you say that a line has been crossed, I think that what we've seen is this, and I find this extremely worrying, is this shift towards a different understanding of freedom and a different understanding of the relationship between the individual and the state. We seem to have now crossed the line into this realm where the assumption is that freedom is something that is granted to you by the state.
A prize you get for good behaviour.
And that your ability to go about your life is something that you shouldn't take for granted, that isn't something that is yours, it's something that is given to you, like you say, in return for good behaviour, as you would have as a child. And the same with your body, with your bodily autonomy, that your body is almost something that is owned by the state or by the majority, and what you do with it should be determined by this vague idea of the common good, which is a very malleable idea. And so I think in many ways we've sort of crossed the Tiber into an entirely different realm of thinking about the way the individual relates to the state.
I also, at the same time, as trying to avoid the constant gloom, I wonder if an inertia might enter the equation, and that people without any militancy or anything else might just simply have run out of steam and won't get the booster. And if they get the booster, they might not get the fourth. They won't wear the mask, not out of any, flaming torch determination to fight the state, but just out of an exhaustion. I genuinely don't think that people can take much more.
I think you're starting to see some of that fatigue set in. I mean, it's reported this week that this is something that Chris Whitty is concerned about. And I think, particularly in relation to the restrictions, I think with the vaccinations, I think there's not only a lot of public trust in them, but there's also the case by which the deal, as it was set out, was we're going to go through this period of basically disease control by diktat in order to get us to a position where we can vaccinate everyone. Now that that's been met, I feel like people are going to feel like that was the deal, that was the bargain. And also they recognise on a common sense level we will never be safer than we are now in relation to this, in relation to this virus. And so I think you will start to see that sense of fatigue, partly out of just a sense of, as you say, exhaustion with the measures, but also because the nature of all of these restrictions, even the slightly smaller ones, is everyone working from home now? Does everyone have to wear masks now? Do you need a PCR test to come back from holiday, which will price a lot of people out of going on holiday and all the rest of it? It just underlines a sense in which you're not really in control of your own life more than about a day ahead. And that's really psychologically difficult to deal with. And people have been doing it for almost 2 years now. So I agree. I hope to see, and I think we will see, just that sort of fraying around the edges. It will be sort of unspoken about, but I think we'll start to see it, definitely.
I think the pandemic is over. I genuinely do. There will be variants, and COVID will be among us. It's joined the party now, and it's always going to be there. But I think the pandemic is over, and the government can't bear to let it go.
It's something that is, historically true, that when the government gets powers, it's very difficult to figure where the exit is from any kind of crisis, whether it's a war or a pandemic or any other kind of crisis. Governments don't necessarily know easily how to leave that war footing, and I think that there's something in that, because people, as you mentioned with the boosters, people aren't going to want to be on that hamster wheel forever. And people will start saying, because the goalposts are changing, because that has a really deep psychological effect, people who did get the vaccination and possibly have already had the booster, when the goalposts keep moving and they keep being told, for example, in the European Union, discussing whether or not after 9 months your vaccine isn't enough anymore and you need to have a booster in order for this to keep going, whilst at the same time lots of people are obviously going to have natural immunity, people who have, even got the virus once they've been vaccinated. People will, I hope, and maybe this is misplaced optimism because all of my optimism in the last 18 months has been misplaced. I hope that people will start thinking, well, this doesn't make any rational sense anymore, and perhaps the way that all of these measures are contingent on my behaviour and coercing my behaviour is something that, we just need to refuse to comply with.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.
Are our government and our scientists losing the plot on this pandemic?
In terms of today's announcement, I think they had no choice, did they? I was driving down the M40 when the announcement was made this evening. As far as I understand it, that they're going to bring back masks.
By no choice. Surely they had a choice.
Pardon?
Surely they had a choice.
No, I don't think they did have a choice, because I was one of the people who criticised Boris nearly 2 years ago now, when he didn't close down quickly enough. The Cheltenham Festival, you remember the big football match as well. He's had criticism from then. What we actually need now is clarity. We need absolute clarity, which I think, from what I've heard tonight, he's actually given. He said, right, this is the situation. These ones are closing down. We'll review it again in 3 weeks. Everyone to wear a mask on public transport. I think he had no choice but to do that. Otherwise, he'd have just got absolutely pilloried the other way.
Bev, are you in the mood to comply with renewed restrictions, the march, the steady march towards lockdown, perhaps?
No, Neil, not at all. And I completely disagree with what John's saying, in that he feels like he had no choice. I don't believe there is an emergency at the moment that the vast majority of the population needs saving from. I think we have deaths going down. They are already in very small numbers compared to other things which kill people every single day in this country. And I would say, if we don't move on now, then when? Then when? Because the cost of these lockdowns, because I, like you, suspect that another one is probably on its way, the costs to children, to education, to mental health, to relationships, to businesses, to even just the individual psychology, the toll of presume you are ill until you can tell us you are well. I think that's an experiment on the most enormous scale, and the government have never revealed to us what they consider to be the costs and benefits of this process. And so I think it's outrageous that we're staring down the barrel of mandatory mask use again. There is I can see no clinical indication. If the virus has mutated, that's what viruses do. Any of them are no more than 0.3% different to the original strain, and therefore these measures are completely out of proportion to the threat that the vast majority of people face, especially given how many of us have now had COVID, how many people are now vaccinated, and how many people, frankly, don't want this. I don't believe the majority of the British population is scared anymore in the way that we were 18 months ago.
John, vaccines, they say, might not stop Omicron, or whatever they're calling it.
Yeah.
But then in the next breath, they say, so take your boosters. Do you see any natural logic in that? That which doesn't seem to be working, take more of it.
Well, Neil, as per usual, you're mixing two things up. And with the greatest respect to Bev, she's doing the same. What was announced tonight is not a lockdown. What was announced tonight, unless I've misunderstood it completely, was he wants to bring back masks for 3 weeks. He wants people to carry on with the vaccination, and he wants people to get boosted so you are protected against Delta. This new variant, no one really knows what's going to happen with it. I don't think this necessarily means we end up in a full lockdown. No one wants to end up in a full lockdown, Neil, myself included.
John, I think
so. Scott, excuse me. What people should be doing is complying, not doing what you've just said. Are you in a mood to comply? I.e., don't comply. And Bev's.
Let me give. Can I?
Listen, I respect her for her opinions, but that has not been announced tonight. Don't misinterpret what's happened, because that's not fair.
But masks, there is no data. As I understand it, and I'm as across this as anyone, masks don't work. They don't.
Can I just give you a little? And also, they don't. I mean,
anything. Bev.
They don't. I mean, in terms of a respiratory virus with such tiny molecules as COVID-19 has, do you know what? I don't judge somebody if they want to wear a mask. If you're an adult and you want to wear a mask, I don't like it, but I will not judge you for doing that. I picked up 4 children from school on Friday, just to give you an idea. And this one teenage boy got in the car, and he's about 13, 14. And he had a mask on in my car, and I said to him, "You don't have to wear that for me." And of course, he just sort of sat there scared, and he hadn't met me before. But I said, "Come on, I'd love to see your face. I want to talk to you. You don't have to wear that for me." And he eventually sort of took off his mask, and to see these 14-year-olds who are developing, who are trying to grow in confidence. We already have a generation of teenagers that just want to look at a phone because they find conversation difficult. And in the end, he took his mask off and he opened up and he chatted And we had a really good conversation on the way home. And I needed to set that example to my daughters who were in the car as well, to say, for children particularly, the masks are utterly unnecessary, and they are going to wear them, and they are learning to be compliant, and they are learning to be quiet, and they are learning to do what authority tells them to do, even if it is not based in any sort of logic or science. And that makes me sad.
John, where does your faith in mask wearing come from?
It's not just about the mask wearing, it's the mask wearing, the social distancing. It's making sure you have the vaccine and you have the booster. Give yourself the best possible chance, give the rest of the community. I came down the M40 today, went to Beaconsfield service station for a comfort stop, shall we call it, and it was like a football stadium. It was heaving, no one was wearing a mask, no one was social distancing. It was completely crazy. People have not been responsible enough. There is a new variant. We don't know what the variant's going to do yet, but I think he's done the right thing today to err on the side of caution. It isn't just about masks. It isn't. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. It isn't about just about masks. It isn't just about having the vaccine. It's all of these things combined together, and it's about us being a part of the society, which I thought you'd have been in favour of, Neil, with your background in history and archaeology, but you seem to think it's every man for himself, and I think that's a pretty distasteful way of looking at it, and I think you're misinterpreting what the press conference was tonight, although I do say I may be wrong because I was driving at the time.
But there's no reason, there's no data that I'm aware of that says that the masks make any difference. And there is also, at the same time, there's data that says that the masks might actually be detrimental to health and to mental health. And I simply ask where you get your faith. I personally see them as theatre. I think it's just a badge that says I'm a good person and I'm complying with the rules.
No, I'm sorry, that's nonsense.
I see it as I'm a scared person.
Outside your bubble are actually wearing the mask, and for you to describe them in that way, or I don't know whether Bev was talking about me earlier, but maybe I got it wrong. But she was saying about people being scared. Well, people are a bit scared. Ordinary people are wearing the mask. The more you get outside of London, you'll see that, and people do have faith in them, Neil. They think it's just one part of the armoury. And likewise, I think now we have to wait and see what happens with this variant. I think to be just as cynical about it as you have been about the rest of it, when you don't even know what this variant is going to do yet, I think is rather remiss of you, if you don't mind me saying.
Bev, all across... Have we lost Bev? We've lost it.
That's a shame.
John, all across Europe, there are governments contemplating everything from lockdowns for the unvaccinated to mandatory vaccines, in the case of Austria. Are you in favour of that, or are these governments out of control, drunk on power?
No, I don't think they're drunk on power. I think they're probably very fearful, and their first job of any government is the protection of its citizens. You put a whole host of things into that basket there. I don't think necessarily all of those things will happen in this country. I think if we stop cynicism, and people got off their backsides and actually got vaccinated, did do social distancing, did wear masks on the tube and on buses, then I think that would all help towards it. I don't want to be locked down, but sure as hell, that's the way we're heading. And I was in that service station before the press conference happened, and I thought, this is crazy. This is crazy. No one was wearing a mask. No one. And they were literally jumping on each other. You know how busy that place is. And I just think we were asked to take personal responsibility. A lot of people haven't. Stirred up by media figures who most of them have been double vaccinated. I'm not talking about you because I don't know your vaccination status. But there are other people who are stirring this up. They're double vaxxed and they've had the booster. And it's kind of like, you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful how you message things.
As Bev said, though, if people want to wear masks, then 100% they should. Yeah. And whatever precautions people want to take, whatever medicines people want to take, whether they want to social distance, stay in their homes, they have my full, unqualified support. But you wear a mask to protect you. Right. And if your mask is working for you, then being in the presence and socially distanced from somebody who isn't wearing a mask should put you in no peril.
I wear a mask to protect myself and also to be courteous to other people as well. I had a bit of a sniffle last week. I wouldn't want to be sneezing and coughing over people. I wouldn't want those people to feel insecure if I did that, even though I do a lateral flow most days, because my wife works in a theatre, so she has to do it. So I'll give myself one as well, just to be sure. I have been triple jab now. I've had the booster. My wife had it 2 or 3 days ago. I would say everybody get the jab, get the booster, because getting this illness is a hell of a lot worse than having the jab. And when people say, oh, you can still get it, yes, you can. It doesn't stop you getting it, but it will reduce the symptoms. And I've had 3 friends now who've been at death's door with COVID-19, and I'm telling you, they would have probably been dead if they hadn't had it. That's the truth of it. And I just think we just need to be sensible. And you need to give Boris a little bit of rope, maybe to hang himself, because the problem was the clarity wasn't there last time. He can't be accused of that this time. He's gone, bang, let's do this.
Bev,
well done, Boris.
Bev, are you back with us?
I am. Sorry about that. Always having tech difficulties.
That's all right. Bev, do you see us ever getting beyond this? You know, John is saying we've got to, here we are, another variant, and as I understand it, with the way that viruses mutate, there might always be mutations of this coronavirus. And if the response is like this every time, masks, increased restrictions, whatever, people's lives compromised to a greater or lesser extent, can you envisage a time where we get beyond it?
I still kind of wake up every morning and wonder what we're waiting for. And I think that's one of the frustrations, is that we've never been given a clear metric by the government as to at what point we are out. I remember, you know, summer 2020 talking about, there was lots of commentators, well, not that many actually, because the mainstream media isn't covering it terribly well, but lots of us on the sidelines saying, what is your metric for us being out of this? Because is it deaths? Is it infections? Is it what? Now you wonder, should it be what our vitamin D levels are? You know, what is the metric at which the government say enough? And I think it's a type of psychological cruelty to not give us the finish line. Now you can you know, John, you can shake your head, but I'm very interested in what people see as the metric. Is it when there is zero COVID? Because there will never be that. Is it when you had you know, injections every 6 months for 10 years? Like, what is the metric? What would you be happy with? When do you say enough? We just have to get on with living. People have always died. Sadly, people have always died from viruses, and I'm not underestimating the impacts that SARS-CoV-2 has had on many people. But one thing has not changed. This is predominantly a disease of the elderly. It is predominantly a disease of the sadly already unwell and the obese. So we have to look on a case-by-case basis for individuals, and I think individuals have the intelligence actually to behave accordingly and to behave in a way that they see fit, especially given what we know now about transmission and the fact that the vaccines are doing very little for transmission. We can see how many people have had COVID and have really great, robust immunity. We're all getting to the stage now, it feels like, where lots of us know people who've had COVID and have come out of the other side. And I don't know whether the end line is just individual acts of peaceful non-compliance so that the system just cannot be maintained. Because if the system is only in place to appease people's fear, then it's a failed risk assessment. A lot of people who are frightened, it's a failed risk assessment.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.